Okay. So we've got, you know what, let me open this. We've got two pending proposals. Restrict promotion to infallible operations, which has been an FCP for a while. Are there any updates on this? Looks like it's ready to merge. Doesn't sound like it needs anything else. Any final comments? Okay. Types as const parameters. This again.
This one is in FCP to close.
Yep.
I don't think there's any new developments here.
Nope, and I'm going to go ahead and close. Well,
the bot will close it in another 6 days, right?
Yeah, we'll let it wait. It's fine. Usually I've just been closing it the meeting after, but no big deal. Okay. LinkedIn project board updates. Skim along here. So we already dealt with these. Are there any updates along here? Const evaluation? I guess no. Oh, well, actually I have an update. The update is that that me and LCNR spent some, I won't type and talk at the same time. We sat and worked out a bunch of test cases covering sort of the range that of surface behavior that we expect to stabilize. I think there's been some Zulip conversation I haven't caught up on since then, but we're working towards producing those tests, and that was helpful. I think the question, I guess, is there's been no RFC or other, like from the LangTeam point of view, what kind of process do we expect here? I feel like we need to describe somewhere the stable subset of constant generics that we're enabling. I'm curious what people think. An RFC, a stabilization report, a blog post? I don't know what the best way forward is. There has been, of course, Boats' blog post, but it'd be nice to have one sort of from the team.
So I would think that if it's what we're stabilizing, then a stabilization report sounds right. But the problem is that currently stabilization reports are just like random GitHub issues on the Rust repo that are impossible to find in the future. So like they don't really get preserved in any meaningful way.
Yeah, which I think is okay. Well, which is not great, I guess. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's great since it's like defines what the feature that we've actually stabilized is, right? It's sort of
right. And sometimes they do too, which is non-optimal. Yeah, that pushes me somewhat too. I mean, that would be the option of a stabilization report combined with a blog post or something if we feel like we want a more definitive document, but it's still a bit, I guess I think an RFC seems not inappropriate to me.
Well, I think it doesn't necessarily involve a lot of discussion because it's like just agreeing
a lot of
this is rated. Yeah.
I mean, I doubt it's going to be super controversial either, right?
Right.
If it is, that's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. But
yeah,
just outlining the proposal and the motivations and so forth. Okay. So I guess stabilization reports, I guess we can summarize as seems appropriate, but is not a great place for lasting documentation. RFC would be more visible, but we don't really need.
Yeah, but isn't this not the right project group?
What's that?
This is the other project group, isn't it?
Yeah, you've actually got a point.
So I mean, at least leave the comment on it the other. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll recenter this comment here. Well, I think we can leave it at that and come back to this. Like, we'll think about it. And writing it up, regardless, we have to start doing a little write up. I think that is kind of growing on the blog post posts and whatever has been uncovered in the meantime. And once that write up's there, we can kind of decide how we want to wrap it up and get it out. But slow and steady progress, I guess. Is there anything with the declarative macro repetition counts? Is anyone in the call even from that group? No, maybe not. Okay. Very well. Okay, project safe transmute. Or I don't know, we'll go through the list. Async foundations, I don't think there's anything new besides this. There's still this draft RFC available. People get a chance to look at it. Great. Any comments on that so far? Okay. And cost evaluation, I didn't see anything. I'm just doing no updates there. Okay. And project safe transmute. I haven't been able to follow the RFC. I'm curious to hear from folks who have been. If there's been any activity recently.
I haven't gone through the.
Go ahead, Scott.
I haven't gone through Zulip to catch up on some here discussions to try and make a meeting thing that it was supposed to do.
I know that okay, that's fine. Ryan reached out to me and mentioned some. I'll take a look what I don't know. That maybe he had prepared some notes, something along those lines. Anyway, all right, moving on. RFC 2229. These are all implementation. I think the short answer, since I'm kind of shepherding all of them, is that implementation proceeds for all of them. In particular, this is the closure capture RFC, and that is one where the implementation is going quite well. Actually, maybe I'll take a moment just to add a few notes here that we did uncover a few interesting, like over the course of this work, we uncovered a few interesting sides around closures that we hadn't thought about. Like one of them is, let me post the update in here. Be easier. No, I don't have it set up for that yet. One of the things we discovered is around the behavior of closures where you don't, they're like captures that have no semantic meaning, but which still occur today. So an example would be this, or even without this move actually, like this closure would borrow X today because there's no actual use of X here, but it does get mentioned. Under this RFC, where we're actually looking at more deeply at how closures get used, we, I think, would not borrow this at all. The plan is to bring this in a new edition because it's going to make some other changes to how we capture anyway. And so that these kinds of cases will slightly change behavior and we'll have to add a lint around migration. We could preserve the behavior in this case if we really wanted to, but not clear why we would. And so, yeah. That's the main thing. I think that's the main bit of backwards incompatibility we've encountered so far, apart from the expected one of it captures different, more precise things, which can cause destructors to run at a different time. Okay. Never type is still proceeding. We've kind of got a working lint, but it encountered some trying to make it past the lib standard without getting too upset. So just a pain in the butt. Yep. FFI inline the same. Any updates here about inline assembly or instructions that attribute?
Nothing new since the last discussion about it.
Okay. And raw ref macros, we are now in FCP. Yay. So that's great. Okay. Finally, just so everyone knows, about design meetings, one thing I wanted to say is that we have 2 design meetings scheduled. Next week, RFC 2580. I think I forgot to actually write this in here. Should have a thing in your invite in your calendars. And I think we need somebody to kind of do some preparation for this. I am willing, I think, but I wouldn't mind if someone else wants to. But I would like a few tips on like what if people have been following, what kind of material we should prepare. Like a summary of RFC 2580 would be good, but there are some other RFCs, right, that are relevant. Do we want to reach out to the authors thereof? Does everyone remember what this is? This is the pointer metadata vtable stuff.
Right. This is the one for which we've seen several RFCs over the years, and we need to try to consolidate.
So I think that the big desire is some way of programmatically dealing with the vtable of a trait. And then there's also sort of a vague concern about being forward compatible with eventual custom DSTs.
By programmatically deal with the vtable, you mean like be able to copy it around and move it?
Yeah, right now what you do is you create like a ReperC trait object struct and then you transmute, and this is all totally unsafe, easy to get wrong.
Right. So maybe so immediate desire is to be able to manipulate representation of trait objects, but want to be forwards compatible with future developments like custom DST, DNA plus B, etc. So maybe that suggests that we would want to summarize some of those and their implications.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say this is probably summary of the RFP and what it proposes. I'll just leave this note and let people do it asynchronously. But if folks can leave comments with e.g. pointers to RFCs, etc., that would be useful to help in preparing this document. Sound good? Let's leave it at that. Does anyone else want to do it, or should I try to do this? I am interested. I would like if people will read it also. I'd like to get it done like so that people have time to read it. All right. I'll take it on. and try to get it done the next couple of days. Probably won't be too long. That's okay. The other meeting that we have scheduled is this meeting. So this is scheduled for November 11th. And the local authority did a good job summarizing, so people should read that and or the paper. Is it November 11th or no, the 18th? And the last thing I wanted to say is I want to change to the compiler team's process around scheduling design meetings, but I'll talk about that. But the short version is every 4 weeks we have a planning meeting where we discuss what to do and look over the ideas. And we can do that maybe on Zulip or something, but that basically just seems to work for the compiler team. And I feel constantly confused about how we're doing it.
Do we have a plan for this week's design meeting? Are we doing Bonanza again?
Good point. We do not have a plan. I think Bonanza is a good idea.
Sounds great.
All right. Let me update the issue.
This actually seems like a good time to ask. I had a stream on Zulip in Tlang private for discussing the meeting scheduling. It would be potentially awesome to move either this meeting or the design meeting to Tuesday so that the meetings were adjacent in the week, trying to create more uninterrupted blocks of time. And I know that people have in the past expressed some concerns with either this meeting time or the design meeting time. So I thought I'd ask. There's a thread on Zulip. We can continue discussing it there, but I wanted to call attention to it.
There's a thread in the public or in the private only?
I believe it's in Tlang private, but I can move it to Tlang so that we can include more people who attend the meetings, actually.
Okay. All right, let's go to the rest. So we have these 2 nominated RFCs. This one is nominated for the compiler team. Super trait item shadowing, I think, was kind of, we talked about this last time, right? It was Scott, you had an update, and you wanted to hear from Boats if they had any concerns before moving forward, I think.
Yep.
Once I look at it again and try to remember why I would possibly have a concern, because I don't.
I think there was a note that you were also going to look at it, so I wanted to get a chance to say what you had to say.
I think that, well, I thought that we should just do this, is what I thought. So
great.
So
I'll write a ICP merge then.
No.
Cool. So we had this long-running discussion about having forbid and warns in the same scope. And Mark, you prepared a comment. Do you want to summarize what it said?
Sure. So in general, the behavior here has changed in a relatively narrow way with the PR that Felix originally wrote. So to summarize, I think there's sort of 2 things that are sort of wrong right now. That the first thing is we don't have any warning if you put like deny, and then after that you put allow on the same level. It just gets, the first one gets silently ignored with any lint level except for forbid after the PR in question. And then, so my proposal is that we probably want a warning of some kind when you're ignoring an attribute, which has historically been sort of a pain point in general in the compiler, but here it's sort of another instance of that. And then the second thing is to continue with the similar behavior, which is introduced by the PR, but modify it slightly to, instead of being a hard error, be a forbid by default lint, which would mean that you can't disable it locally within your crate, but you can disable it with cap lints, which sort of match the behavior of forbid in general, where it doesn't actually take any effect outside of the current crate.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know we could have a forbid by default lint.
Not something we've ever done before, but it's a clever idea.
Yeah.
It actually seems like an interesting way to do a hard error.
So can I, just to clarify something? Oh, I see, yeah. This, basically the idea is this warning about skipping or ignored attributes, if the attribute is a forbid, would be differently. That's the idea.
It would work essentially the same, except that potentially the attribute would be sort of not actually ignored. I don't think there's an inherent difference whether the attribute is forbid or not. Just there's potential for. I guess I think it's an open question whether we want to treat forbid differently from all other attributes in terms of, like, if you list forbid and then allow at the same level, whether that should be actually a error, or we should do the same thing we do for every other attribute where we only consider the sort of latest one you say. I sort of buy the argument that we want to say something stronger for forbid, but I don't have a strong opinion.
That would be my argument as well, that if forbid doesn't have these special behaviors, then it's just basically deny. And sort of the whole point of forbid is to get the extra strength out of it.
Yeah.
If you have today forbid and then allow in a nested scope, that's a hard error, right?
That is indeed a hard, I want to say that's a hard error, yes.
So
Yes.
under this proposal, it would actually weaken slightly to a forbid by default.
No. So, well, I guess it would, but
The way you wrote it here.
Let me check again. But I did not intend to weaken behavior.
Okay. I think if we just said that in this one case, we might do a forbid by default lint where they're at the same level and it's a hard error otherwise, and we do that for backwards compatibility reasons, I could think that would make a lot of sense.
I think
Yeah,
I would
so
actually be
it is a hard
okay
error.
even. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
It is a hard error to override in nested scopes today in any compiler, so stable and nightly.
Okay.
So I'll toss out one other thing that would be okay by me and slightly weaker if we wanted. As long as forbid is what applies to that scope, I would be okay, even if it's not a forbid by default, about having multiple different ones. If you say, to me, if you said allow, forbid, deny, and warn at the same scope, you would then get a bunch of warnings about unused attributes, but the behavior of the whole thing would be that it's forbidden inside that scope, and that would be okay by me. And then it would still have the, it's forbidden internally, and if you try and change the level from forbid inside that scope, it would continue to be that hard error.
Yeah, I do. It sounds like the difference you're proposing is that you should get an error, but you should also like be able to continue compiling the rest of the code without bailing out, and the rest of the code can proceed as if it is forbid.
I think that would be the same way anyway, because a forbid by default lint presumably also allows us to continue compiling.
What would the difference be then?
Okay, sorry, I'm thinking of continue compiling as in continue giving error messages, but it would still fail.
That's what I meant, yes.
Okay, yeah, yes, you could run your unit tests even though you said forbid and warn on unsafe code, as long as you didn't actually use any unsafe code by trying to allow it somewhere.
Right.
Which I think is okay, because it's basically, okay, you have dead code in your attributes, but we don't need to forbid dead code in attributes necessarily.
And you would, Scott, relax that behavior for sort of nested scopes as well, not just the same level?
I think I'd leave nested scopes alone.
Interesting.
So the thing I feel the strongest about in this whole conversation is that because you said forbid anywhere, forbid is what happens inside whatever level you put the forbid on. I am not as worried about the particular messages or lints we give for where you said something that contradicted the forbid, as long as it doesn't actually apply, if that makes sense.
This whole thing is a regression, but one of the issues was this whole thing about we don't have code in place to sort of pick the strongest condition or to pick forbid when it occurs anywhere, and that's probably not hard to implement. But I remember part of the thing we talked about last week, I think, was just this issue that we need to get something done about this quickly, right, or relatively quickly. So I just want to make sure we pick a solution that's feasible to actually get backported or backport if necessary.
So
it's currently on nightly, so we don't need a backport, but regardless.
I would be interesting, Mark, do you just want to, if you are interested in implementing, do you just want to experiment? You kind of, I think, have a sense for the constraints, maybe? Or, you can always ping Scott and other people.
I feel like I have a pretty good sense for the constraints. Yeah, I would be willing to spend a bit of time trying to work out an implementation here and sort of see what falls out naturally.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Like, and then we can judge that specific thing, and you'll also be better informed about, oh, that would be really, like, that proposal would be a real pain to implement because X, Y, Z, or actually, yeah, that'd be easy to do.
Sounds good.
And I don't think I have a problem with the trying to override forbid as a forbid by default either, necessarily, depending on what you come up with. It seems like a good mix of semantics and implementation.
Forbid by default is a clever hack, Mark. Never considered that. So, okay. There's a bunch of nominated PRs around. And nominated PRs and issues. I kind of went through and tried to outline some of the points about them. I'm going to jump a little bit. I think there was some that I thought were higher precedence. Yeah, I want to jump down to, should have reordered them, but this one, use dep1 foo as dep1 is considered ambiguous. If you recall this good old friend, this used to be accepted, it became an error, this affects some code. The new update is that Mark posted this update that several crates were broken, and proposed that we should not break them, in short, unless we want to do it over an addition. And Petroshenkov indicated that it would not be very hard to retain this behavior if we wanted to. It just kind of gives us some less flexibility going forward. Your reasoning, Mark, is basically it's more widely used than we thought, and it's not unsensible, I guess.
Yeah, in particular, it seems like there is sort of enough use cases that don't seem immediately like sort of trivial one-off examples. And I could see myself writing the same code sort of naturally without thinking, oh no, this is like really weird.
Yeah. It has sort of only one natural, there's a self cycle, but there's also kind of only one obvious way to resolve that cycle. I don't know what happens actually. I'd be curious if people did any experimenting. If you have more ambiguity, I mean, let me make an example. Like if you, where we are. If you had something like this, now there is sort of, which dep1 are you talking about? I suspect this is already an error for probably probably for multiple reasons, like exporting the same name more than once, for example. So that if it's really only the case that it's exactly in this self-selection case, then it seems like it's also okay to me. anyway, does anyone have?
Would it be unreasonable to also have a lint suggesting that people use : nonetheless when this occurs? Or is that, I mean, I guess it's a separate question about coding style and what we recommend.
I wouldn't have a strong opinion. If we did plan to deprecate it in addition, that would be a hard requirement, I would say.
Anyway, I'm definitely cool with just reverting, guys. As in do what Petrochenkov says is the way to re-add support. That seems like the obvious step forward at this point.
Okay. Very good. Unless anyone objects now, I would say I'll post a comment saying that we agree with Mark and we should reject. Okay. There are other important ones, so I'll highlight this one because it has a proposal and we've talked about it before. If you remember, we had this wrapper transparent rule that can be bypassed by generics. And the only problem was if all the types in the wrapper transparent are of size 0 and have a alignment 1, kind of what is the behavior, what should it be? I went ahead and wrote up some rules and did an FCP merge, basically saying, based on the thread above, if you have one ZST means a ZST of alignment 1, so size 0 alignment 1. You can have any number of those, and at most one other field, and that T behaves like U, and if there's only one ZST types, then it behaves like unit, which probably doesn't matter because I don't think you can pass an ABI. But, so check your box if you think or raise objections as you wish. I just wanted to call attention to it.
The thing I was curious about here is, are there any ZSTs where ABI is important?
Yeah, I wondered about it too. In other words, you had some marker ZST that you wanted to behave like, for example. It also happened to have size 0 and alignment 1, but in some other way was special. I'm not aware of anything like that. Like there are some weird types in the C spec that get treated specially as far as I know, but they're not 0 size.
Yeah, the only time I can think of that a 0-sized type would come up in the context of FFI would be if you were trying to make something that was equivalent to void pointer by doing pointer to ZST. Even then, I'm not sure if that's important or viable.
Most ABIs
feels like then it's pointer ABI regardless anyway, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and C, apparently it's UB to have an empty struct in C, which is very C, but...
I was going to say, until very recently, like empty stuff is still not something C really supports that well, so I don't think there's any real like defined behavior we have to match per se.
Cool.
CCC does support it. Like it's not your, it's an extension.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm confident none of the compilers actually make it UB.
Right. Well, I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? Anyway, here's another regression to call attention to. So let's pull that one out. Mark, did you have some notes on this? I didn't get time to dig in.
Not in particular. It's another case of us linting more stringently on attributes that were in sort of weird places.
I see.
Yeah.
So this was target feature being used places where we
didn't do anything with it, and now it's, I think, a hard error, which
Yeah, okay. And there were 2 crates affected.
Yeah.
And these seem like these are indeed kind of nonsense.
They definitely, like the cases here definitely seem like something where the author is definitely not getting the behavior they expected. That said, it's sort of ambiguous whether we want to break or not here. I also wanted to flag that potentially there is some T-compiler policy here that needs to be discussed in terms of, like, I don't think the PR in question was ever raised with Lane team. And I think we've sort of oscillated over time on whether that's necessary or not. But
yeah, I don't think this is really. It's a good question. I feel like this is, yeah, I'm trying to decide what I think. It seems like this is not a policy. This was a bug fix, which usually we have held out doesn't really require a link team approval, but we are talking about the resulting regression. So I don't know. We should make a design meeting, Mark. You and I should sit down and talk about a regression policy, since it seems like something we both care about, and try to make a proposal and a meeting around it. But I feel like
coming at this from a totally naive side, it feels like there's an attribute that doesn't get denied in every place that it possibly could happens a lot. I don't know if that's something that can be improved somehow, because it would be nice, or maybe this is just, it has been and now we're getting all the fallout of that, or it seems like we get a lot of these issues.
I mean, in theory, things that the fact that we have the unused attribute mechanisms in the compiler, you would think that we have the code would for most attributes, you have checking the paths that either it's used somewhere in the code paths that's applied, and thus, like, you know, you'll get the appropriate, like there is some behavior attached there. And if it's being applied somewhere it is not used, then you'd get the unused attribute warning, right? So it's sort of a funny thing that we do encounter this as much as we do, given that we have these other mechanisms in the compiler.
Yeah, in theory, we have a mechanism for this. In practice, it does seem, I also don't know, Scott, whether this is all fallout from like a small set of PRs.
It is not. No, okay. The problem, like the compiler is really bad at tracking whether it's actually using something or not in terms of attributes. Mostly because the code is like spread out and each pass does it on its own essentially.
There's a kind of auto mechanism where we sort of, when you ask about, if you ask an attribute, if it has a given name and it does, it records itself as used, and otherwise it doesn't, and so forth. But I guess it doesn't work that well.
Yeah, we ask for a name in sort of more cases than we actually use the attribute, and that makes it over eager.
Yeah, that's tricky. It may be something, it seems like something to raise with the compiler team more than anything else.
Yeah, in this case,
what would the thing be to do to raise that as a thing? Just put a bug somewhere. I don't have an MCP kind of thing for it, obviously.
Right. I guess filing a bug, but
fortunately, they were like pretty abstract bug today.
Yeah.
Opening a topic, maybe, but maybe someone will come up with an idea.
Yeah, I am inclined to permit this, as I said.
Yeah, I think we will, but thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Is anyone in this meeting opposed to landing this breakage?
We have any sense? We still don't have a sense of like we still have, even within crates.io, we don't test Windows crates or things like that, right?
No, we only test on x86 64 unknown Linux GNU.
Yeah, okay. All right. Any objections to me pressing comment here?
On that topic that Nico just mentioned, I mean, have we thought about what would be required to test Windows crates?
We have, yeah. It's a painful story.
All right.
But probably not for this meeting.
Yeah. Okay, then I'm just going to jump back to the top because I think that was all the regressions that I saw. We'll go down. So there was this target has atomic config tracking issue. I'm not actually sure exactly what this is tracking. I think it's tracking the like atomic I32 and then I64 types. And I nominated it, or I didn't nominate it, this person did, to bring it to our attention, basically because it's a pain that they don't exist. This is kind of libs, I think, more than lang, but it's tagged as lang. Do people agree? It's a little bit of...
It is kind of one of those cases of this is technically lang because attributes like this are a language thing, but it, that's kind of only nominal.
This is like specifically about the config attribute and not the types in the standard library that it may apply to. Is that right?
Right, exactly. The types in the standard library bit is absolutely a libs team thing. That's not really our domain. The config attribute itself is us, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for this to exist and for it to make its way towards stable.
I would actually say that maybe we shouldn't be looking at stabilizing this because it feels very odd to be using this, but not like what you really want to say is like config accessible, right? Like if libstud has
That's
different atomics, then this is entirely useless and you're likely to get errors if stud's config is not precisely this one, which presumably it isn't, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely fair. I would rather see config accessible finished out and done than do this.
I feel like the last time we looked into this, we thought that it was kind of, I'm not sure if that was wrong, but it does seem like it comes up, at least the second time it's come up in recent memory. I wonder if somebody wants to look into that a little. But... Yeah, well, Mark, do you want to leave a quick comment just suggesting config accessible?
I can do that, yeah.
I think I agree with that. It'd be nice to have one mechanism, especially if this is really just testing, are those types available, which is, sounds like what it is testing. All right, next issue is 67264 and the continued controversy around these patterns. Specifically, I guess there's no specific comment for me to highlight here, so I'll just jump back, but there's been some discussion, especially around .x and whether we want to accept that because it's a little confusing since .x could start from 0 or could start from the minimum type value for your type in principle. And maybe people
your comment about the dot contains on the ranges doing the same thing as the patterns is persuasive to me.
Right. So for people who didn't read it, like we've already standardized, like already stabilized this behavior. For better or worse, it behaves in a certain way. And so it might be nice to offer it in the form of a pattern as well, so that you can say the same thing. I mean, I guess this won't literally work with X. Let me change it to a constant. But, I don't know. I would like to drive this half open range patterns thing to some conclusion. Like, it'd be nice to just decide what we're going to do and be done. And it seems to me to be a little arbitrary not to include it, but
so we can discuss this further asynchronously. I do feel like there is an additional chance for confusion in doing this in match and patterns that doesn't come up with contains, because contains is just not that common comparatively to patterns. All of the examples for this I've seen have more or less been, I want to not care what type this is, like whether it's signed or unsigned. And it seems like in a lot of common cases, there are ways to write the same thing more exhaustively.
I don't think it's just contains, though. That's just one example of it, because anything that range bounds has this. And like if you do a lookup in a B tree, it also doesn't start from 0 or anything. True.
So I think one of the really common cases, I mentioned this on the thread, is that one of the most common cases other than patterns where people run into ranges are uses with things like vectors and slices. Like I want to take this vector and slice out a subset of it, or I want to drain some subset of it or similar. And for that purpose, there are no negative indexes in a vector. I would not be at all surprised if like the most common use of ranges outside of match is on usize for indexes. So that's why I think there's potential for surprise when you run into a case where, oh, wait, that isn't just until beginning of list or vector rather. This is like until bottom of type or beginning of type, which is actually negative rather than 0.
I think I have trouble figuring out when that would cause someone a problem, though, because we have that really good integer overlap checking and warning now. So if you do have something that, if you try and write any other arm that tries to handle those negatives, you'll get a warning from the compiler and it will tell you, hey, no, you've already handled all of those.
I think I'd be more concerned about if you if you don't write an arm that is intending to catch that negative is wrong. Like an example that was given at one point was, oh, I want to handle time. So I'm doing, .59 for seconds. And the person who posted that specifically said, come to think of it, I think these things are signed and we actually don't have any handling for the negative case. And that immediately made me think, okay, maybe this isn't a good idea. Maybe this is actually causing people to miss that they're not handling negatives. They're just writing .59 and thinking that means 0 to 59. Or rather, .60 or equal 59.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure it's much worse
I don't
than
know
saying
either. I don't feel
.59, which is of course also wrong, as you said.
Right. I don't feel strongly like this is a terrible mistake. It's more, I can see a lot of potential for confusion there. And on the flip side, the concrete examples that have come up have seemed like they could be better written in another way.
I wonder then if this is a Clippy should suggest, Clippy might want to warn against things if they're negative or something like that, and not a, we shouldn't allow this.
That has potential. It's also worth noting the concerns I have apply only to half open on the left intervals, range 2. I have no concerns whatsoever about stabilizing range from or range from inclusive. Or sorry, range from and range from to inclusive and similar.
I agree with the previous statement that it feels a bit odd to do 2 of them, but not the other 2. But do we want to just say, hey, look, if someone wants to make a stabilization PR for the ones with lower bounds, great, let's do it.
I would be I would be game to stabilize. Yeah, like basically you're saying stabilize this.
Yeah, as uncontroversial, let's just do it, and then we can have more conversations about the others later.
I'm not sure we actually have a ... equal open-ended like that.
Yeah, I don't think we do.
It doesn't really mean
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So this case specifically, we're saying is fine.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see why not. I mean, we always move things incrementally.
Yeah, I will also note that I have very rarely seen patterns that like actually want a ... x thing, like except for the case where you put 0 in the initial part. Like it seems like the only real case where you want that is negative numbers, and it feels like it's more readable to put the like explicitly say I32 min or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, there's a case to be made. I feel weird about leaving it out, but I would rather go forward with this case and wait on the other cases. Like, I agree that the overall seems low.
One other related note, I did see people mention that the only real like at least one person mentioned that the only real reason they don't want to have to write that out is that then they have to write like I32 : min or U64 : min or similar, and that it's nice to not have to think about what the type is in that context. Has there been any discussion about associated constants recently in terms of like we could have a numeric type for which like bounded numeric types for which there is a min and a max, and you could just name min and it works for anything that's bounded?
That's interesting. We have not. So supporting associated constants in match is complicated. But
doing the type inference because is this a thing that is this type?
Yeah. So what you're proposing, and we supported. Let me take this note to make sure I'm getting it right. Associated constants fully. You could do something like. Is this the idea?
Yeah, I will avoid bike shedding naming, but yes, that would be the concept.
Yeah, right.
Theoretically, you might also be able to import the associated constant so that it was implicitly available.
Sure. The challenge, I agree that would be nifty. The challenge is that at least today, we have problems with this because the way we implement constants and pattern matching kind of requires us to really know the value of the constant before monomorphizing. And since we wouldn't, we would be in trouble. And it makes things like exhaustiveness checking harder for obvious reasons. It's not to say it couldn't be done. It just, I'm not sure actually exactly how much freedom, but we'd have to tweak things in the way we've implemented stuff. But anyway, all right. So I think we have agreement on this step. So I would propose that somebody summarizes this comment and puts this as a call to action. I don't know who's up for that.
I can do that.
Okay. And we'll leave the rest of these for next time. Thanks, everybody.
One thing to toss up that probably not have to talk about now, but related to safe transmute, there's an interesting conversation with Ralph about whether you can safe transmute integers to pointers and vice versa. And that seems like it's going to be another very complicated conversation that we probably have to think about at some point.
Yes.
It's worth noting that isn't specific to safe transmute. The discussion was effectively, can you transmute between integers and pointers? And if you do so, is that introducing UB? Obviously, if it introduces UB, you can't do it safely or unsafely. If it doesn't introduce UB, then yes, it would be reasonable to be able to do some of that safely.
So is that then a statement that we have to figure this out for deciding which things the compiler auto implements it, but it wouldn't impact the interfaces in any way?
To the best of my knowledge, it would not impact the safe transmute interface, correct? It would only impact what is actually implemented. Agreed.
And then anything involving generics has to be bound on the safe transmute traits anyway, so that would probably all work out. Cool, okay.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. I will try to catch up on that. Talk to you all later then.